Cedar Grove was the kind of place people dreamed of settling in, serene, picturesque, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Nestled among towering oak trees and shaded streets, the town had an air of perfect tranquility. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where every home had a neatly trimmed lawn and families gathered for neighborhood barbecues. Yet, beneath its quaint exterior, Cedar Grove hid secrets that were about to unravel, secrets that would shake the community to its very core. The Lawson family had been the heart of Cedar Grove for over 15 years. Victor Lawson, a 50-year-old real estate mogul, had built an empire from the ground up. His reputation was synonymous with success. He was the kind of man people admired, charming, driven, and effortlessly charismatic. He had climbed the ranks of the business world through sheer willpower and a relentless pursuit of wealth. He seemed to have it all: power, money, influence, and the admiration of his peers. Then there was Lily Lawson, his wife. At 48, she had once been the epitome of elegance and grace. A boutique owner with a keen eye for fashion, she was known for her magnetic personality and sophisticated style. To the outside world, their marriage was flawless. A perfect partnership, Victor and Lily were the golden couple. But what the world didn't see were the cracks beneath the surface, the whispers of discontent that had begun to creep into their seemingly perfect lives. Their story wasn't always this way. Lily hadn't always been the picture of happiness. She had known the sting of heartbreak, a painful loss that lingered in the corners of her mind. Before she met Victor, she had been in love with a man who promised her the world. But when he left her for another woman, the devastation was too much to bear. It was then that she found herself at a crossroads, her dreams of becoming a curator at a prestigious museum shattered, her hope for a family faltering. Victor had come into her life like a whirlwind. He had offered her stability, a life she could rely on, even if it meant putting her own dreams on hold. They married quickly, their wedding a lavish affair held in a historic mansion with silk drapes and crystal chandeliers. For years, their life seemed perfect, a fairy tale that everyone around them envied. But the happiness that had once seemed so vibrant began to fade with time. The painful loss of their child, born premature, had shaken their foundation. The nursery they had so eagerly prepared for the baby remained empty, a haunting reminder of what could have been. Despite their efforts, Lily's subsequent attempts to conceive were unsuccessful. The strain on their marriage was palpable, and the intimacy they once shared became a distant memory. Victor's work began to consume him. Long hours at the office, endless business trips, he was rarely home, leaving Lily to retreat into her boutique, where she poured her energy into her business. But even there, the emptiness lingered. The once thriving boutique became her refuge, her only source of solace as she struggled to fill the void left by the absence of love and connection at home. To the outside world, they were still the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, they were simply roommates, coexisting in a house that no longer felt like a home. Their conversations became minimal, their physical intimacy a rare occurrence. The distance between them had grown too wide to bridge, and their love had slowly turned into a ghost of what it once was. And then, as if fate had something cruel in store for them, the Moore family moved in next door. Daniel Moore, a respected literature professor, had moved to Cedar Grove with his wife, Sophia, a talented landscape architect. They had come seeking peace, escaping the hustle and bustle of the city to start fresh. Their 21-year-old son, Ethan Moore, was spending his summer working on a local conservation project. The Moores were new to Cedar Grove, but they quickly became part of the community. They were warm, engaging, and eager to make their mark. Little did they know, their arrival would set into motion a chain of events that would unravel the lives of everyone around them. Ethan Moore, fresh from college, was eager to embrace the simplicity of small-town life. He had no idea that his presence in Cedar Grove would forever alter the fate of the Lawson family. He was just beginning to find himself, to explore what he wanted from life. But that would all change the moment he crossed paths with Lily Lawson. At first, it was innocent, just a simple conversation about gardening at a neighborhood block party. But that conversation would spark something neither of them were prepared for. What started as a friendly chat about roses in the garden would quickly spiral into a dangerous and passionate affair that neither could escape. Their lives were about to change forever, and Cedar Grove would never be the same. The summer air in Cedar Grove was thick with humidity, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and made everything feel heavier. The quiet town had a way of slowing time down, as if it were a place where nothing could possibly go wrong. But for Lily Lawson and Ethan Moore, the stillness of the town felt like a pressure cooker, a place where their secret, however brief, would become an unbearable weight. It all started innocently enough. The block party had been just another occasion for the neighbors to gather and exchange pleasantries. Lily, feeling out of place among the laughing, carefree crowd, had retreated to the patio for some fresh air. That was when Ethan stepped outside, looking for a moment of respite from the socializing. Their eyes met across the quiet yard. At first, neither of them said anything. Ethan offered a tentative smile, and Lily responded with a small one of her own. It wasn't a spark, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that neither of them would be able to control. Their conversation started with simple pleasantries, gardening tips, the weather, and the unremarkable details of life in Cedar Grove. Lily was surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. There was something about Ethan, his curiosity, his gentle demeanor, that felt like a relief from the distance she'd felt in her marriage. For the first time in a long time, someone was genuinely listening to her. And Ethan, for all his youthful energy, was drawn to her elegance and maturity. It was an attraction that began innocently, but it had the potential to grow into something dangerous. As the weeks passed, Ethan found more excuses to visit. He would help her with her garden, offering tips on planting that she could never quite remember. They would spend hours in the backyard, chatting about everything and nothing at all. It was easy, it was comforting, and it made her feel alive again. But the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. The chemistry between them was undeniable. There was a thrill in the forbidden nature of it all, the idea that no one knew, that they were getting away with something that felt both exciting and wrong. And despite the guilt that gnawed at her conscience, Lily couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Ethan. One humid afternoon in early July, the inevitable happened. Ethan had come over to discuss a new garden layout, but as they worked, a sudden downpour trapped them inside the house. Seeking shelter in the sunroom, they stood by the window, watching the rain cascade down in sheets. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. Then, without warning, Lily leaned in. It was a moment that seemed to stretch forever, both of them holding their breath. She kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, as if neither of them could believe it was happening. But then, the kiss deepened, fueled by a shared yearning that neither could control. Lily, who had spent years in a marriage that had faded into routine, felt a rush of emotion, of desire, that she hadn't felt in years. And for Ethan, the kiss was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had never imagined his feelings for the older, married woman would turn into something so consuming. When they finally pulled away, neither of them knew what to say. The world outside the sunroom seemed distant, as if time itself had stopped. The rain continued to pour, but in that small space, they were suspended in a moment that neither of them could undo. Neither spoke about it at first. But it was clear, their relationship had crossed a line. They weren't just neighbors anymore, they were something far more complicated. In the days that followed, their meetings grew more frequent. They found more excuses to be together, each moment more intense than the last. Ethan couldn't help but be captivated by Lily's sophistication and the thrill of their secret. He found himself falling deeper for her, though he knew it was dangerous. He was living in a world of conflicting emotions, guilt, excitement, desire, but above all, a growing obsession with the woman who had become his escape from the pressures of his life. And Lily, too, couldn't ignore the way he made her feel. For the first time in a long time, someone saw her, not just the woman married to the successful businessman, but the woman who longed for something more. Each stolen kiss, each whispered conversation, gave her a sense of joy she had long forgotten. It was wrong, but it felt so right. She had become addicted to the attention and passion that Ethan gave her, the connection that she had longed for in her failing marriage to Victor. But, as with all forbidden things, the weight of their secret began to take its toll. Every encounter became more risky. There were moments of panic, times when they almost got caught. Victor or the neighbors might appear, or someone might ask a question that would blow everything wide open. The pressure of hiding their affair grew unbearable. But despite the growing fear, the intensity between them only increased. And then, it all began to spiral. By the time the summer heat reached its peak, Victor Lawson had begun to suspect something was amiss. He didn't know the details, but the distance between him and Lily was palpable. The late nights at the office, the long hours on business trips, he was starting to feel like a stranger in his own home. The cracks in their marriage were widening, and the truth was waiting just beneath the surface, ready to explode in a way none of them could anticipate. In the midst of it all, Lily and Ethan were lost in their passion, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. The affair that had started as an innocent distraction was about to bring them to a place where no one, not even they, could escape the consequences. The oppressive heat of August lingered in Cedar Grove, thickening the air around the Lawson house like a tangible weight. For Victor Lawson, the pressure was mounting. His latest real estate deal, a once promising venture, was faltering. He had spent sleepless nights in his study, poring over contracts and numbers that just didn't add up. Frustration simmered beneath the surface, making every moment feel heavier than the last. Yet, despite his workaholic tendencies, something else gnawed at him, something he couldn't shake. A feeling. A suspicion. Victor didn't want to believe it, but the signs were becoming undeniable. Lily had become more distant, her smiles colder, her conversations shorter. He had noticed her absence during dinner, her reluctance to engage in their usual evening routine. The once lively discussions about business, life, or their plans for the future had turned into silence. The house, which had once buzzed with laughter, now felt more like a mausoleum. Yet, as much as he wanted to ignore it, his instincts told him that something was terribly wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, couldn't prove it, but the cracks in their marriage were widening. Victor started to notice small things, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on Lily's clothes, the nervousness in her voice when she spoke of errands she had run or places she had been. He chalked it up to stress, to his growing sense of dissatisfaction with his work, but deep down, he knew that there was more. And the truth was about to slap him in the face. On the morning of August 10, 2015, Victor Lawson left early for what he hoped would be a crucial meeting to salvage his deal. The office was a place he could lose himself in, away from the tension at home. But that day, the usual sense of control he felt in his work was absent. The numbers still didn't align, the projections were off, and nothing seemed to go right. By 2 p.m., he was fed up. He made a snap decision. It wasn't like him to leave the office early, but today felt different. He would go home, regroup, and return later for another round of revisions. The drive back to the house was uneventful, but when he pulled into the driveway, something caught his eye. The rusted truck belonging to Ethan Moore, his next-door neighbor, was parked a little too close to his driveway. Victor didn't think much of it at first. He assumed Ethan was helping Lily with some yard work, something that didn't seem unusual, given their casual friendship. But as he got out of the car, a subtle unease began to settle in his gut. The house was quiet when he walked through the door. Too quiet. There were no sounds of footsteps or music, no laughter or the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Just an unsettling stillness. He froze as he walked deeper into the house, his eyes scanning the rooms. Everything appeared normal, but something felt off. The half-empty glass of orange juice sitting on the kitchen counter struck him as strange. Lily had always been particular about what she drank. Orange juice was not something she liked. His suspicion deepened. Then he heard it. A muffled noise, coming from upstairs. At first, it was faint, but as he stepped toward the staircase, it grew louder. Victor felt his heart pound in his chest as he slowly climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight. His mind raced, but his body moved almost automatically, driven by some primal urge to get to the source of the sound. He reached the master bedroom door, and for a moment, he stood there, hesitating. Something inside him screamed to turn away, to ignore what was about to happen. But he couldn't. He pushed the door open. The scene inside was seared into his memory forever. Lily, his wife of 15 years, was lying on their bed with Ethan Moore. Her face flushed with surprise and guilt, Ethan scrambling to pull away from her. Victor felt his world shatter in an instant. His mind was flooded with disbelief and rage, but before he could process what was happening, the words spilled out, a guttural shout. "What the hell is going on here?" The two of them froze, the reality of the moment crashing down on them. Lily scrambled to cover herself, her face pale with fear, while Ethan stumbled off the bed, knocking over a nightstand in his haste to get away. It was chaos, raw, unfiltered chaos. Victor didn't even think. His rage overtook him, a tidal wave of anger and betrayal that clouded his judgment. His hands shot out, grabbing Ethan by the collar and yanking him off the bed. He didn't know what he was saying, only that he needed to hurt them, to punish them for the unimaginable betrayal. His fists flew, landing hard on Ethan's face, but in the frenzy, Ethan fought back. As they struggled, Ethan's hand found the heavy lamp on the bedside table. Desperation drove him to swing it wildly, a reflex, an instinct to defend himself from the man who had once been nothing more than a neighbor. The lamp connected with a sickening thud, striking Victor in the head. For a moment, everything went still. Victor staggered back, his face contorting with shock, disbelief, and the searing pain of betrayal. His vision blurred as he collapsed to the floor, a pool of blood rapidly spreading beneath him. The room fell silent. It was a silence that felt heavier than the world crashing around them. Lily screamed, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. But it was too late. Victor Lawson, the man who had built an empire with his own hands, was lying lifeless on the floor of his own bedroom. As the seconds ticked by, both Lily and Ethan stood frozen, horror and guilt written across their faces. This wasn't just an affair gone wrong, it was a murder. And the consequences of that moment would ripple through their lives, and the lives of everyone around them, forever. The silence that followed Victor Lawson's sudden death was suffocating. Lily Lawson and Ethan Moore stood motionless in the bedroom, the weight of their actions settling over them like an oppressive storm. Blood pooled around Victor's lifeless form, his once formidable presence reduced to a mere figure sprawled across the floor. Lily, shaking uncontrollably, finally broke the stillness with a sharp, desperate scream, but it did little to shatter the gravity of what had just transpired. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan was trembling, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and terror. He had never intended for this to happen. He had come to Lily's house that afternoon for what was supposed to be another clandestine meeting, another stolen moment of passion. But now, standing over the body of the man who had been his neighbor, his reality seemed to have splintered into something unrecognizable. Lily, her face pale and filled with disbelief, looked at the body, then at Ethan, then back at Victor. There was no going back. She could feel it in her gut, the irrevocable nature of the moment. Her life, the one she had spent years carefully constructing, was now destroyed. Her marriage, her secret, and even the facade of normalcy she had clung to, had all crumbled in a single, violent instant. The silence in the room was deafening. Through the panic, Lily knew what had to be done. Ethan was still paralyzed with shock, but she quickly snapped into action. Her mind raced with frantic ideas, calculating the best way to cover up the crime they had just committed. The first thing she did was make sure that Ethan was no longer a threat. She grabbed him by the arm, pulling him away from Victor's body, urging him in a shaky voice, "We need to hide the body." Ethan, still in a daze, nodded numbly, his hands shaking. He didn't fully comprehend the weight of the consequences yet, but the fear in Lily's eyes was enough to push him into motion. They couldn't let Victor's death be discovered, not yet, not until they figured out how to explain it, how to make it disappear. Together, they wrapped Victor's body in a sheet, struggling under its weight as they moved it down the stairs. Lily's heart pounded in her chest, each step feeling like an eternity. They finally managed to get Victor's body into the bed of Ethan's truck. Lily drove Victor's car to a nearby parking lot, abandoning it there to make it appear as though Victor had simply left for a business trip, as he often did. When she returned to the house, her mind was racing with thoughts of what to do next. She and Ethan spent the next several hours cleaning the bloodstains from the bedroom floor. Every swipe of the cloth felt like a betrayal. The smell of bleach filled the air, but it did nothing to cover up the sickening weight of guilt that clung to them both. The once beautiful room, filled with the memories of a life now shattered, was transformed into a grim crime scene. For the next 2 days, Lily and Ethan avoided each other as much as possible. The fear of being caught was a constant presence, gnawing at them. Lily took calls from Victor's office, explaining his absence by saying he was out of town for a business trip. But when Victor failed to show up for a critical meeting, something in his office snapped. They grew suspicious and decided to send someone to check on him. The HR manager, concerned by the growing uncertainty about Victor's whereabouts, showed up at the door. Lily's heart raced as she opened the door. She barely kept herself composed. She had planned this out, but now, seeing the suspicion in the HR manager's eyes, her carefully crafted lie began to unravel. She lied, telling him that Victor had left for a business trip, hoping to deflect any suspicion. But the HR manager wasn't convinced. Something about her story didn't sit right with him. He asked why she hadn't filed a missing person report yet. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She stalled, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "I thought he was on a business trip," she replied, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. But the HR manager wasn't easily fooled. He noticed the tension in Lily's voice, the small inconsistencies in her story. His suspicion only grew as he left the house. He called the police, requesting they look into Victor's disappearance. Within hours, the police arrived at Lily's doorstep. The weight of their presence only intensified the guilt that Lily felt. The officers were polite but persistent, questioning her about Victor's last known whereabouts and the strange absence of any communication from him. Lily did her best to maintain her composure, but the strain was visible in every shaky breath she took. Every time she answered a question, it felt like she was sinking deeper into a hole she couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Ethan was back at school, his mind consumed with guilt. He had stopped communicating with Lily, agreeing that they should both lie low until things calmed down. But the longer they waited, the more it felt like the walls were closing in around them. He couldn't stop seeing Victor's face, frozen in shock and pain. Detective Olivia Harris was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator, Olivia was no stranger to murder investigations, but something about Victor Lawson's case didn't sit right with her. She was quick to spot inconsistencies in Lily's story, noticing how often her hands trembled and how her eyes darted nervously whenever a question was asked. As the investigation deepened, the first cracks in Lily's carefully constructed facade began to show. The police dug into the phone records, looking for any signs of foul play. It didn't take long before they discovered that Victor's last phone call had been made to Lily, and the number had been conveniently erased from his call history. They also found records of an ongoing affair between Lily and Ethan Moore, a secret neither of them had been able to hide for long. The deeper Detective Harris dug, the closer she got to uncovering the truth. The walls that had once seemed so safe for Lily and Ethan were closing in, and soon, the tragic consequences of their crime would be revealed to the world. The investigation into Victor Lawson's death had gained momentum, and with each passing day, the pressure on Lily Lawson and Ethan Moore grew. Detective Olivia Harris had become more convinced that the answers lay in the lies both of them had carefully constructed. Lily's calm demeanor was beginning to crack under the weight of her guilt. Every time she spoke, she felt the growing sense that she was digging herself deeper into a hole that she could never escape. In the quiet of her home, she tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy, continuing to answer phone calls from Victor's colleagues, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, she was falling apart. The calls became more frequent, the questions more pointed. Her answers, once calm and assured, were now filled with cracks, her nervousness betraying her every time she opened her mouth. By now, Ethan was starting to feel the burden of their shared secret more heavily than ever. At college, he couldn't focus. He couldn't sleep. The image of Victor's lifeless body haunted him, taunting him every time he closed his eyes. The guilt, the fear of being caught, was slowly consuming him. He had thought he could escape the reality of what he had done, but the weight of the truth was impossible to ignore. His avoidance of Lily was a silent admission of his own guilt, but the distance didn't make him feel any safer. He knew it was only a matter of time before the walls closed in. Then came the breakthrough. A tipster, an anonymous source who had been watching Lily and Ethan closely, had noticed their frequent meetings and their increasingly intimate interactions. The tip led Detective Harris to a stash of incriminating evidence that would finally expose their affair. There were secret text messages and emails, undeniable proof of their illicit relationship. The detective quickly obtained a search warrant for Lily's phone records, and soon, it was clear, the affair was not just a brief fling, it had been a full-fledged emotional and physical betrayal that had led to Victor Lawson's murder. The case against Lily and Ethan was now irrefutable. Detective Harris called them both in for questioning, and this time, there was nowhere for them to hide. The evidence was overwhelming. Lily's composure began to slip as she was confronted with the damning texts, the calls, the lies. Ethan was brought in separately, his expression grim as he too faced the truth. Sitting in the interrogation room, Ethan felt as if his world were collapsing around him. He couldn't deny it any longer. The affair had been reckless and passionate, but now it had led to something far worse than he had ever anticipated. Lily's face was as pale as his own. She sat across from him, her eyes filled with resignation, knowing that their lies could no longer protect them. They had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. When the charges were formally filed, both Lily and Ethan found themselves in a prison of their own making. The evidence against them was undeniable, and the community of Cedar Grove, once so enchanted by the perfect lives of the Lawsons, was shaken to its core. The perfect image of Victor and Lily Lawson had crumbled, exposing a web of betrayal, passion, and murder. Lily had betrayed her husband, her community, and ultimately herself. Ethan had betrayed his own future, sacrificing his dreams for a fleeting affair that had cost more than he could ever repay. As the trial approached, the courtroom was filled with tension. The community had been rocked by the scandal, and many struggled to reconcile the image of the perfect couple with the grim reality of what had transpired. Lily took the stand, her face a mask of stoic resignation. Her voice cracked when she admitted to the affair, but she insisted that she never intended for Victor to die. She explained the confrontation with Victor, the chaos that ensued, and how Ethan had struck the fatal blow in a moment of panic. Her words were filled with regret, but there was no undoing what had been done. Ethan, too, testified, his voice trembling as he described the tragic events that led to Victor's death. His testimony was filled with sorrow, remorse, and a deep sense of disbelief that something so senseless had spiraled out of control. He spoke of how the affair had begun innocently enough, but quickly turned into something that neither of them could escape. His parents sat in the courtroom, their faces etched with grief, struggling to reconcile the son they had raised with the person he had become. As the trial progressed, more secrets about the Lawson family's hidden life emerged. Victor's colleagues testified about his increasing stress and the tension between him and Lily. Neighbors spoke of the strange dynamics in the Lawson household, how things had seemed off for months before Victor's death. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the evidence and the emotional testimonies. The room was heavy with anticipation as the jury finally returned with a verdict. Ethan Moore was found guilty of second-degree murder, and Lily Lawson was found guilty of being an accessory to murder. The courtroom was silent as the sentences were read. Ethan was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and Lily was sentenced to 15 years. The punishment was harsh, but it was the only justice that could be served for the senseless murder of a man who had once been beloved by the community. As Lily and Ethan were led away in handcuffs, the people of Cedar Grove began to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The town, once known for its idyllic perfection, was forever marked by the events that had unfolded within its walls. Victor Lawson's death had shattered not just the Lawson family, but the entire community. The house that had once been a symbol of success and happiness now stood empty, a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded within. In the aftermath of the trial, Cedar Grove slowly began to return to its normal rhythms, but the shadows of the Lawson case loomed large. The Parkers, too, were never quite the same. Ethan's parents, devastated by the loss of their son to the prison system, withdrew from the community, unable to face the judgment of their neighbors. The once beautiful home of the Lawsons remained vacant, a symbol of the darkness that can hide behind the most perfect facades. The tragedy of Victor Lawson, Lily Lawson, and Ethan Moore was a stark reminder that even the most idyllic communities can harbor the darkest of secrets. And in the quiet aftermath, the people of Cedar Grove would never forget the shocking betrayal that had changed their town forever.